So, hello, fellow philosophers and human beings. Today, we want to talk about Sloterdijk's idea of the Asian Renaissance. Renaissance means usually that something is born again. So, what can he mean? Does he mean the Renaissance of old classical ideas in Asia? No. He means the fact that Asia is born in our continent through the ideas of Western thought. And I mean, we have here a lot of odd, odd occurrences that we can observe. So, for example, I always find these videos about ideas of martial arts very interesting. So let's have a very brief look at this here. So we see here how different martial artists use bogus ideas, right?
Things about this job, besides the legions of adoring fans and crippling existential crises, is the occasional opportunity that comes with stumbling across a weird, baffling internet hole and seeing just how deep and dark it goes.
The deep, dark internet hole. So Super Eye Patch Wolf, that's a good analysis or interesting analysis of how martial arts is adopted into our culture as something that has like these superpowers. Now, we also have other ideas of the integration of Asian thought in our culture when we adhere to meditation. I guess you all know Sam Harris, who's
Take
pretty
a seat either in a chair or cross-legged on a cushion.
who's pretty popular in that region, right?
And gradually become aware of the sensations of sitting. Feelings of pressure in your back or legs. Feel your...
And yeah, then we usually in that same stream of ideas, we then usually criticize the Western culture that we are just focused on maximizing our profits and we never turn back to ourselves, and we should go back to the Indian ideas or to the Asian ideas. And the question, of course, is whether that is suitable for a correct assessment of the situation, or whether there is not a certain romanticizing. And the analysis seems to be similar to what Marx actually does when he criticizes our culture. And Sloterdijk also starts this with a quotation from Paul Valéry, a French essayist and philosopher who lived from 1871 to 1945, and who in this passage here describes the human being. Sorry, not the human being, the European being, explicitly the Homo Europaeus. And he says that the European mind can be characterized by maximizing everything, a maximum of needs, a maximum of labor, a maximum of capital, an ambition to power, a maximum of transformation of external nature. And then he says that it is remarkable that we as Europeans don't define ourselves by race or language or customs, but by the amplitude of will and our aims. So this is a first assessment of what European culture is about and how it actually conquered the world through the project of discovery. And now, however, there is a counter-discovery, as Sloterdijk calls it, a counter-discovery where we start to discover ourselves through the cultures of others. That does not mean that we really understand the other cultures, but that the other cultures are reborn in our culture. And this kind of renaissance, as Sloterdijk says, is based on a great misunderstanding. So he observes, first of all, the intellectual world trade that happened or began in probably the 18th century and lasted or peaked in the 19th century, where the Romantics imported Asian ideas and saw them as a general expression of the world soul, as we can see here, and then tried to formulate a humanist ideal of world cultures. So Sloterdijk writes, romantic ecumenism proclaimed, in which Persian poetry and translation of the Upanishads were passed around as evidence of the actually metaphysical activity of the world soul. And he compares this kind of integration to something that is way extremer and maybe way more extreme and maybe can be compared to Japan's model of self-liquidation, where the Japanese actually do a certain form of seppuku harakiri. And they did that industrially by completely adopting the West. And as the real East throws itself into industrial, scientific, political, and military mobilization in order to leave its old ways of thinking and being behind, the West is experiencing a cultural Asianizing for which there is no historical precedent. And there is a conquering of the conqueror through the Asian motives. And in order to explain that, he gives us an understanding of the Renaissance, because in the Renaissance we had a conquering of the European continent by classical Greek ideas. And somehow this occurs with the Asian culture, except that we are way more unrelated historically to the Asian culture. But let's first look at what this Renaissance is about. And of course, you know the Renaissance of Leonardo da Vinci, which was a new understanding of man. And it utilized old ideas, but it didn't convert to the old. So he says Renaissances are visualizations of old cultures in new contexts. They are enthusiastic repetitions, and they built a great vehicle for innovation. But he claims, or he points out, that they are also a passionate misunderstanding of the old by newness. There's always an intense misrecognition involved, which makes it more successful. And the Asia mania, that has to be understood in this misunderstanding without having roots in the European history. And for him, it's not just a fashion trend or an episodic exotism. And he gives us 4 reasons, or here he says conclusions for why that happens. So first of all, the post-Christian era does not have enough terms, enough intellectual means to understand itself anymore. He says for giving itself meaning, it has exhausted its formative powers. Second, modernity also, as he writes, has used up its moral reserves and has no counterforces. So the European secularism, as he also calls it, does not have a moral answer anymore. It's basically a blank slate in terms of its morality. And sometimes it still utilizes Christianity, but this is not convincing anymore, because we have this dual commitment to self-determination and large-scale technology. And then third, he says that the last European generations tried to invoke liberal forms of neo-paganism, but it didn't work. It didn't work, and they may have built small rural communes and had a kind of homemade religion, but they were not intellectually deeper than a Friday afternoon or Saturday afternoon or evening party conversation. So therefore we have fourth, the selection of particular Asian texts that can answer these, and they built a world cultural alternative to the Greco-Judean-Christian path that we have already left. So Asia Mania is then an understanding of ourselves by grasping something that is antique, that in this way doesn't really exist in Asia anymore. And we do that because it is foreign to us, it is not us, and we want something that is not us because that's the thing that is most similar to us. In other words, we become so uncanny to ourselves through our modernization that the old strange sounds of the Far East suddenly begin to sound like an old familiar idiom. how to express that. He has another quote here further down below. We find ourselves in a world that is both foreign and our own at the same time. In modernity, the subject only knows itself as that which cannot know itself and cannot name itself. So therefore, it finds, in a world where it has destroyed its tradition, it grasps a tradition that is not its own. And because the most familiar feeling is being foreign to itself, it searches for that which is the most foreign. And here it achieves a persistent self-misrecognizing. So precisely because modernization has evaporated our old European traditions and identities by way of progressive mobilization, the most foreign ancient tradition is no longer more foreign than the one that has until recently been our own. Yeah, so this is the bizarre world of Asianization in our culture through a new form of Asian Renaissance. So we adopt Asian ideas, but only in the way of how we try to look for alternatives and by that conquer ourselves. And that's why we see so many weird concepts. So here, for example, we have also an honest meditation.
Sit or lie comfortably, quietly. Allow yourself to be here, fully, in this moment. With your eyes closed, begin to connect with your inner world of thought and feeling. Gradually, let the horseshit of the external world fade from your awareness. If you find your mind wandering to other thoughts, don't let it concern you. Just acknowledge that all that shit is fucking bullshit.
So here we have it, right? We have the idea of integrating a rejection of our modernity through the foreign forces of a meditating technology imported from Asia. And you see here we have the monk. We also have praying traditions in Europe, but they are too close as that we can adapt them. So therefore we want to subvert to the Asian models, but not for true admiration of Asia, but rather for the fact that we have become foreign to ourselves. So I hope this was interesting to you. If you like this idea of a new renaissance, then follow that channel. So I have different videos on this topic. I want to read through Sloterdijk. I'm happy if you comment on that. I have different channels where I will present that. So probably I put this here on my philosophy channel because it's less related to technology. It just explains an underlying factor of our current technology. I also have a channel on technology. I would be happy if you subscribe and discuss these subjects with me and maybe share it with others. If not, that's also fine. In any case, thank you for watching, and I hope you live long. You import more Asian cultures, and by that you may prosper.